The central chamber of Marcus's sanctuary was unlike anything they had expected. While the outer sections showed clear signs of decay, this space had been perfectly preserved by systems that still hummed with quiet efficiency. Neat rows of thriving plants lined the walls, their care automated by an intricate network of mechanical devices. "This is incredible," Tom breathed, examining the nearest mechanism. "Look at these pressure differentials. He's using basic thermodynamics to create perpetual motion. It shouldn't be possible, but—" "Dad!" Nadia's voice cut through the chamber, tight with emotion. "I found him." They converged on her position, where a cylindrical chamber stood in the center of the room. Its walls were transparent, filled with a clear fluid that had preserved its contents perfectly. Inside, seated in what looked like a carefully constructed chair, was Marcus Holt. "It's a stasis chamber," Chet observed, his sensors scanning the device. "Completely mechanical, using principles I've never encountered before. He designed it himself." Marcus looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping. His long white beard was neatly trimmed, his mechanic's uniform clean and pressed. In his hands, he held a sealed case. "Yes. There's a note," Mariana said softly, finding a sealed envelope attached to the chamber. Her hands trembled as she opened it and began to read. "To those who find this place, I, Marcus Holt, make this final record with a clear mind. The madness that has been my companion these many years has served its purpose, but now I choose to leave on my own terms. My work is complete. The sanctuary will continue without me, and my discoveries are preserved for those who might use them wisely. Elizabeth and the Council understand. They've helped me prepare this final chamber, my last contribution to the specimen collection of Novus Prime. Study it well. Even in death, there are lessons to be learned. In my workshop, hidden behind the third garden's western wall, you'll find everything I've learned about terraforming, about survival, about the very nature of life itself. Some of it came from science, some from desperation, and some from what others might call madness. All of it works. Use it well. Marcus Holt, last gardener of Novus Prime." "He planned this," Donald said quietly. "Every detail." Nadia was already moving toward the western wall, her engineer's instincts driving her forward. "Here, there's a seam. Dad, help me with this panel." The hidden workshop, when they finally opened it, took their breath away. The walls were covered in schematics and formulas, some recognizable, others completely revolutionary. Models and prototypes filled every surface, each meticulously labeled and documented. "Captain," Chet called out, his processors whirring as he analyzed the data. "These designs, they're beyond anything in my databases. He's solved problems that have plagued terraforming efforts since the war. The principles he's developed, they could transform planetary engineering completely." Tom was examining a particularly complex schematic. "Look at this atmospheric processor design. It's completely mechanical, immune to electronic disruption, but the efficiency, it's orders of magnitude better than anything we have now." "The madness," Mariana said, reading through a notebook. "It wasn't just isolation, his delusions, the Council. They were a methodology. Look at how he structured his research. Each Council member represented a different approach to problem solving. Elizabeth was biological systems. The Minister of Defense handled structural integrity." "He turned his breakdown into a breakthrough," Donald realized. "Created an entire panel of experts inside his mind when he had no one else to consult with." Nadia had found another sealed note, this one attached to what appeared to be Marcus's most advanced designs. Her voice shook as she read it. "To my successors, what you see here was born from solitude and survival, but it belongs to all humanity. My madness helped me see patterns others might have missed. The Council taught me to look at problems from angles I would never have considered alone. Every innovation here has been tested, proven, and refined over decades of necessity. The gardens will show you how it works. The principles are there, in the intersection of nature and mechanism, in the space between reason and dreams. Learn from my solitude, build from my madness, create something better than mere survival, with hope for the future, Marcus Holt." They stood in silence, surrounded by the genius of a man who had turned his isolation and madness into tools for innovation. Through the workshop's small window, they could see the stasis chamber where Marcus sat, still watching over his sanctuary. "We need to document everything," Donald said finally. "Every design, every principle, every innovation. This isn't just about one lost colony anymore. This could change everything." As they began their work, Chet's sensors detected something else, a faint humming from deep within the sanctuary's systems. Marcus's machines were still running, still maintaining the delicate balance he had created. Even in death, his work continued, waiting for someone to understand what he had achieved in his solitary vigil on a forgotten world. Hours had passed since they'd found Marcus's body, but none of them had thought about rest. Tom and Nadia worked feverishly to understand the engineering principles behind his designs, while Chet processed the massive amount of technical data stored in the mechanical computers. Mariana and Donald continued cataloging the journals, trying to piece together how Marcus's unusual mental state had led to his breakthroughs. "Dad," Nadia called out suddenly, her voice filled with excitement. "Dad, you need to see this. His council meetings, they weren't just delusions. Look at how he structured them." Tom joined his daughter at the workbench where she'd spread out several technical journals. "What am I looking at, kid?" "Each council member represented a different approach to the same problem," Nadia explained, pointing to Marcus's neat diagrams. Elizabeth handled biological systems, but she also represented intuitive thinking. The Minister of Defense looked at structural integrity and failure points. The weather speaker focused on atmospheric dynamics. He created an entire panel of experts in his mind, each with their own specialty and perspective. A formalized method of approaching complex problems from multiple angles, Chet observed, his optical sensors focusing on the documents. He turned his loneliness into a revolutionary problem-solving methodology. Mariana looked up from her own reading. "Listen to this entry. Elizabeth suggested today that we've been thinking about atmospheric processing backwards. Instead of fighting against planetary conditions, she proposes we work with them." The Minister of Defense agreed, though he insisted we consider structural tolerances. The debate lasted 6 hours, but the solution, when it came, was elegant in its simplicity. "And look at the design he produced after that meeting," Tom said, pulling up the relevant schematic. "Atmospheric processor. It's incredible. Instead of brute-forcing atmospheric changes like our current systems, it creates self-sustaining cycles that work with the planet's natural processes." "Captain," Chet interrupted, his synthetic voice carrying an unusual note of awe. "I've completed my initial analysis of his terraforming principles. He didn't just improve on existing technology, he developed an entirely new paradigm. His systems don't just transform planets. They create self-sustaining ecosystems that can resist disruption, even from weapons like those used in the war." Donald moved to examine the designs Chet was referencing. "How is that possible?" "Because he had to work without electronics," Nadia realized, her eyes bright with understanding. "Everything had to be mechanical, had to work with natural principles rather than against them. He couldn't brute force solutions, so he had to find ways to make the environment work for him." Tom was already running simulations on their portable computer. "The applications are staggering. These principles could cut terraforming time in half while creating more stable environments. And because they're based on mechanical systems rather than electronic ones, can't be disabled by electromagnetic weapons," Chet finished, "or by any similar technology currently known to either humanity or my original creators." Mariana had found another journal, this one filled with biological observations. "He didn't just engineer the environment, he studied how life adapted to it. Look at these notes on accelerated evolution, on how plants and microorganisms can be guided rather than forced to adapt to new conditions." "The Council of Roots," Donald read from another document. They weren't just his imaginary advisors for biological systems. They were recording actual evolutionary changes he observed. Every one of his delusions had a basis in real scientific observation. Nadia had moved to examine the central stasis chamber again, looking at Marcus's peaceful face with new understanding. He must have known how important his discoveries were. Why else would he preserve himself like this? He wanted to make sure everything was protected until someone found it. "There's more," Chet announced. "I've found references to experimental data stored in what he called the deep archives. According to these notes, there's a sealed chamber beneath this one containing decades of experimental results and observations." Tom checked his engineering scanner. "He's right. There's another level below us, heavily reinforced. The entrance must be hidden, like the workshop was." "Look for something that doesn't make sense," Nadia suggested, remembering how they'd found the workshop. "Something that follows his dream logic rather than normal engineering principles." They spread out, searching the chamber for any sign of a hidden entrance. It was Mariana who found it, a section of flooring marked with what appeared to be a star chart, but one that didn't match any known constellation. "It's the Council," she realized. "Each star represents one of his imaginary advisors, and in his later journals he wrote about them ascending to the stars." Working together, they decoded the pattern. The floor panels slid away smoothly, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Preserved by Marcus's mechanical systems, the deep archives waited below, holding the full record of his decades of research. "We're going to be here for weeks," Donald said, looking at the vast archive. "Maybe months." "Good," Nadia replied firmly. "Marcus spent 28 years developing all this. The least we can do is take the time to understand it properly." As they prepared to descend into the archives, Chet's sensors detected something else, a subtle change in the sanctuary's atmospheric processors, as if the system itself was responding to their presence, to their understanding of its creator's work. In his stasis chamber, Marcus Holt sat, unchanged, but there seemed to be the faintest suggestion of a smile on his preserved face. His life's work had finally found its audience. "We need to talk about what happens next," Donald said, gathering his crew in Marcus's council chamber after 3 days of cataloging the deep archives. The room's elaborate murals watched over them, the painted faces of Marcus's imaginary advisors eerily lifelike in the artificial light. "What's there to talk about?" Nadia asked, looking up from her notes. "We publish everything. Marcus's innovations could transform colonization efforts across known space. Think of how many lives could be saved, how many worlds could be made habitable." Tom placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "It's not that simple, honey. Some of these designs, in the wrong hands, they could be weaponized. The same principles that make his atmospheric processors so efficient could be reversed. That's exactly why we need to be careful," Donald added. "The survey bounty for this discovery would set us all up for life, but if we sell to the highest bidder, the military would bury it," Mariana finished. "Just like they buried Novus Prime." Chet had been unusually quiet, his processors humming as he analyzed the moral implications. "If I may, I have a unique perspective on this matter. The weapons my creators used here were devastating precisely because they targeted complex electronic systems. Marcus's mechanical innovations could provide a defense against such attacks." "He's right," Tom said. "These designs aren't just about terraforming, they're about creating resilient systems that can't be disabled by electromagnetic weapons. It's defensive technology as much as anything else." Nadia stood up, pacing the chamber with nervous energy. "Look around you. Marcus didn't build this sanctuary for profit or power. He built it to preserve life, to create something that would last. We can't let his work be buried again." "There are other considerations," Donald said carefully. "The corporations that fund most colonization efforts would pay fortunes for exclusive rights to these innovations. We're talking about enough money to fund our own research, to—" "No." Nadia's voice was firm, Read his journals, really read them. He didn't just go mad from isolation. He chose to embrace a different way of thinking because he knew conventional approaches wouldn't work. He created the council because he needed perspectives beyond his own. What would he think of us selling his life's work to the highest bidder? Mariana lifted one of Marcus's personal journals. She's right. Listen to this. The council reminded me today that knowledge, like life itself, must be free to grow, to spread, to find new forms. What we create here belongs to all humanity, to all life. Walls and barriers are the enemy of growth. There's something else to consider, Chet added. My analysis suggests that Marcus's innovations work best when implemented as a complete system. Trying to commercialize individual components would actually reduce their effectiveness. He designed everything to work in harmony like an ecosystem. Tom ran his hands through his graying hair. The engineering principles alone, universities would spend decades studying them, research institutions, colonial development programs. Then let them, Nadia insisted. Let everyone study it. Let them build on it. That's what Marcus would have wanted, not to have his work locked away in corporate vaults or military archives. Donald looked at his crew, his family, reading the conviction in their faces. Mary, what do you think? His wife smiled. I think we all know what we need to do. We just needed to talk it through. There is a practical concern, Chet noted. The data in the deep archives, it's extensive. The principles are complex. Simply releasing everything at once could lead to confusion, misinterpretation. So we do it right, Nadia said. We take the time to organize everything, to understand it ourselves first. We document the interconnections, explain his methodology. We make sure people understand not just what he built, but how he thought about it. A comprehensive academic publication, Tom mused, with practical applications and theoretical frameworks, something that lets others build on his work. We'd be giving up a fortune, Donald said, but his tone made it clear he'd already accepted the idea. Nadia walked to the stasis chamber where Marcus sat. Look at him. Really look, he had every right to be bitter, to keep his discoveries to himself. Instead, he spent 28 years documenting everything, preserving everything, making sure it would all be here for someone to find. Mariana joined her. He could have chosen any way to die, but he turned even that into a gift, preserving himself and his work for future study. The team fell silent, looking at the peaceful face of the man who had turned his isolation into innovation, his madness into methodology. Outside the chamber, his mechanical systems continued their quiet work, maintaining the delicate balance he had created. Then we're agreed? Donald asked finally. We publish everything, make it available to everyone? Tom nodded. For Marcus. For everyone, Nadia added. Chet's optical sensors brightened. I believe the council would approve. In his chamber, Marcus Holt sat unchanged, but the painted faces of his council seemed to smile down at them, appreciation for a decision that would ensure their creator's legacy would live on, free and unfettered, just as he had intended. The sanctuary looked different in the morning light as they made their final preparations to leave. 2 weeks had passed since they'd found Marcus's body, weeks spent documenting, analyzing, and understanding his legacy. Now it was time to go, to share what they'd found with the wider universe. Beacon network is online, Tom reported, checking the markers they'd placed around the sanctuary's perimeter. Anyone who lands on Novus Prime will be able to find this place. The stasis chamber's systems are stable, Nadia added, making final adjustments to the mechanical regulators. I've reinforced the backup systems. He'll be preserved here just as he wanted. She rested her hand on the transparent surface, looking at Marcus's peaceful face. Chet stood in the council chamber, his processors completing their final data verification. All technical documentation has been archived and cross-referenced. I've organized it according to both conventional scientific categories and Marcus's own unique classification system. Including the council methodology? Mariana asked, looking up from where she was carefully packing the last of the journals they'd selected to take with them. Yes. His problem-solving framework has been preserved in full, Future researchers will be able to understand not just what he built, but how he thought about it. Donald emerged from the deep archives, carrying the last set of protective cases. That's everything we need for the initial publication. The rest will stay here, protected for other researchers to study firsthand. They gathered in the heart chamber for one last task. Tom had spent days designing and fabricating a proper marker for Marcus's resting place, and now they carefully installed it beside his stasis chamber. The plaque read, "Marcus Holk, last gardener of Novus Prime, who turned solitude into innovation and preserved life when all seemed lost. His work lives on in every world we transform." "It's time," Donald said softly, but Nadia held up her hand. "Wait, there's something I need to say." She took a deep breath, looking around at the sanctuary, at the legacy of the lonely genius who had created it. "I know what I want to do with my life now. These principles, this way of thinking about planetary engineering, I want to study it, to build on it. Someone needs to make sure Marcus's work reaches its full potential." Tom pulled his daughter into a tight hug. "He'd be proud to have you carry on his work, kid." "Not just her," Mariana said. "This is going to change everything. The preliminary papers we sent ahead are already causing a stir in the academic community. Universities are pledging resources for research. Colonial development programs are requesting access to the designs. The military, too," Donald added grimly. "But this time it won't be buried," Chet assured them. "There are too many copies, too many interested parties. Marcus's innovations will be studied, debated, improved upon. His dream of helping humanity spread sustainably across the stars will be realized." They made their way through the sanctuary one last time, checking seals, ensuring everything was secure. In each chamber, Marcus's mechanical systems hummed steadily, maintaining the delicate balance he had created. Some of his original specimens still thrived, descendants of the plants that had been his only companions for so many years. At the main entrance, they paused for a final look. The morning sun streamed through the carefully designed windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to bring Marcus's murals to life. The painted faces of his council looked down at them with what almost seemed like approval. "You know," Nadia said quietly, "I don't think he was as crazy as he seemed. I think he just found a different way to stay sane, to keep thinking and creating when ordinary logic wasn't enough." "The corporations aren't going to like us releasing everything publicly," Donald mused. Tom chuckled. "Let them complain. Marcus's designs work best when they're free to interact, to grow naturally, just like he intended." "It's what Elizabeth would have wanted," Mariana added with a small smile, nodding to the painted figure that had been Marcus's first and most trusted advisor. "Fascinating," Chet observed. "Even we have begun referring to his council as real entities. Perhaps there was more wisdom in his method than we initially realized." They sealed the entrance behind them, Marcus's own security systems engaging with quiet efficiency. As they walked back to their ship, Nadia looked back one last time at the sanctuary that would change humanity's future. "Goodbye, Marcus," she whispered. "We'll make sure they remember you properly this time." 10 years later, when the first colony using Marcus's principles was established, they named it New Novus Prime. Its atmospheric processors, built to his specifications, worked flawlessly. In the colony's central square, they placed a replica of his council chamber, where researchers gathered to study and debate his innovations. And on a forgotten world, in a sanctuary that still hummed with life, Marcus Holt sat in his stasis chamber, a slight smile on his face while his mechanical systems continued their endless dance of preservation and renewal, waiting for the next generation of explorers to discover their secrets. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.